This is also a time of change for my family. Catherine becomes Queen Consort. In recognition of her own loyal public service, I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely.
5 words changed the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace. I stand with her. King Charles did not whisper them in private, soften them through an aide, or bury them inside a carefully worded statement. He declared his allegiance to Catherine during a tense family council, placing the future queen under his protection, while Camilla sat only feet away. In that instant, loyalty became public, humiliation became personal, and the monarchy's deepest fracture could no longer be hidden. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles watched the room fall silent. Catherine gripped the edge of the table, caught between relief and fear, while William studied his father for any sign of hesitation. None came. The private royal council, a closed meeting where family members and officials confront matters affecting the crown, had been called after weeks of conflict over Catherine's growing authority. Her role mattered because she was not merely carrying out engagements. She was being prepared to help shape the monarchy William would one day lead. Camilla understood that shift immediately, and it struck at the influence she had fought decades to secure. The king spoke again, making the decision impossible to misunderstand. Catherine would continue representing the crown at the highest level, her program would be protected, and her voice would carry greater weight in future planning. The crown meant the sovereign, and the working institution built around the monarch, not simply a jewel or title. His statement therefore placed real power behind his allegiance. Catherine lowered her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by what had just been placed upon her, but the queen consort turned toward her husband, waiting for him to soften the blow. Charles refused. Earlier, he had told his private secretary, in a documented instruction, that the wording must remain unchanged. There would be no compromise, no revised statement, and no apology delivered in secret afterward. He then placed a sealed directive before William. A royal directive is a signed order through which the sovereign gives immediate instructions to the household. The prince opened it and discovered that Catherine's enhanced role had already been approved. Camilla removed her hand from the table. She pushed back her chair and waited, giving the monarch one final chance to stop her. He said nothing. Her face did not show anger. It carried the shock of someone watching an old promise collapse. Then she walked out and closed the council room door with controlled finality. But to understand why Charles chose Catherine in front of his own wife, the private fears carried by all 4 royals must first be exposed. This was never simply a disagreement between 2 royal women. It was a collision between a king, haunted by the instability of the past, a queen terrified of becoming expendable, a future queen burdened by expectation, and an heir forced to watch his father choose between duty and marriage. Every person in that council room had something to lose. Yet Camilla alone believed the king's decision threatened the life she had spent decades fighting to secure. Charles had spent years watching public trust rise and fall around the monarchy, and he understood that Catherine had become its strongest bridge to a younger generation. Her discipline, her calm presence, and her connection with families across Britain offered continuity beyond his reign. The monarchy meant more than the royal family itself. It was the public institution built around the sovereign, its duties, and its promise of stability. To the king, protecting her role was no longer personal preference. It was survival. Catherine understood the cost immediately. Greater authority meant harsher judgment, fewer private moments, and a heavier duty to shield William and their children from the same palace pressures that had scarred earlier generations. She had never asked to become the center of a war. In a private conversation recorded in her secretary's notes before the council, she had urged Charles not to choose sides, fearing that any public declaration would deepen the family's wounds. But he believed silence had already become dangerous. Every delayed decision was making her look weak, and every unanswered challenge was teaching the household that her future position could be quietly undermined. Camilla saw the same future from the opposite side. She feared becoming a ceremonial consort, a spouse who attends official occasions but holds little influence, while William's household took control of the monarchy's direction. Years earlier, during a private conversation at Clarence House, documented by a trusted aide, Charles had promised that no younger royal would be allowed to diminish her place during his reign. Now his allegiance to Catherine felt like that promise had been broken in front of everyone. William felt the tension from both directions. He was grateful that his father had defended his wife, yet he knew humiliation could make the queen unpredictable and leave the monarch trapped between guilt and duty. After the meeting, the prince found Catherine alone, still holding the signed directive. She looked at him and asked whether Charles had saved her position or destroyed the family's remaining peace. He paused, because he could not yet tell the difference. Then he remembered the cancelled meetings, altered plans, and engagements quietly removed from her calendar. Those were not mistakes. Someone had been closing doors long before the king finally opened one. The answer lay inside a chain of hidden decisions and one unforgettable ceremony that pushed Charles beyond the point of restraint. The fracture did not begin in the council room. It began 3 weeks earlier at a national service inside Westminster Abbey, where a seemingly minor alteration exposed a far greater struggle for control. Catherine arrived, prepared to deliver a message personally approved by the king. Minutes before the ceremony, the speech vanished from the official order. Camilla's household called it a scheduling adjustment. Charles recognized it as something far more dangerous, a challenge issued in full view of the crown. The service had been arranged to honor charitable volunteers whose work had carried communities through hardship, and Catherine was meant to give the closing address as the senior voice of the monarchy's next generation. Westminster Abbey is the historic church used for coronations, royal weddings, funerals, and major national ceremonies, making every role assigned inside it a public statement of status. Charles had reviewed her words himself. He believed the speech would quietly show that the institution was preparing for a gradual transition toward William and his wife, without weakening his own reign. Catherine understood that message, which was why the removal cut so deeply. 10 minutes before the service began, an official informed her that the program had become too crowded. She did not protest. She folded the unused pages, took her seat beside William, and forced herself to remain calm, while the future king watched her struggle to hide the humiliation. The prince asked what had happened, but she told him they would speak later. Charles noticed the pages resting in her lap. He leaned toward her and asked why she was not preparing to speak. Catherine quietly answered that Camilla's office had removed the address. The king's expression changed at once, yet he waited until the ceremony ended before demanding an explanation. Camilla met him inside the abbey's private robing room, a secure chamber where senior royals prepare before and after formal services. In a recorded account later preserved by his secretary, she admitted ordering the change because Catherine's prominence was moving too quickly. The queen consort insisted that a reigning queen could not be made to appear secondary while she still stood beside the monarch. Charles replied that the crown could not survive by suppressing its own future. The crown meant both the sovereign and the institution whose stability depended on a clear line of continuity. Camilla then placed the folded speech on the wooden table between them, and delivered the question that changed everything. Would his loyalty remain with his wife, or with the woman who would eventually replace her? The king looked down at the pages, then slowly pushed them back toward her. He left without answering, but that evening he instructed his private secretary to prepare a formal directive protecting Catherine's duties from interference by any royal household. 3 weeks later, the question Camilla had forced upon him returned, and this time, Charles answered it directly to her face. The council meeting ended, but the real confrontation had not yet begun. Camilla waited inside the king's private sitting room, where no officials could interrupt, and no carefully drafted statement could protect either of them. When Charles entered, she did not ask about policy, succession, or royal duty. She asked one devastating question: "After everything I endured to stand beside you, how could you choose her over me?" The king's answer would wound her more deeply than the declaration itself. Camilla had survived scandal, public hostility, family resistance, and years of judgment because she believed their partnership was unbreakable. Charles had stood beside her when the country doubted her, and she had stood beside him when the burden of the throne threatened to consume him. Yet now, behind a closed door, husband and wife were confronting a brutal possibility. The crown might demand loyalties their marriage could no longer share. The crown meant the sovereign and the entire working institution surrounding the throne, where personal affection could never fully escape public duty. Camilla accused him of making her look weak before William's household and disposable before officials who once followed her instructions without hesitation. She said his declaration had not merely protected Catherine, it had announced that the queen consort could be overruled whenever the future king's family demanded it. Charles listened without interrupting. Then he answered with painful calm. He had not chosen Catherine as a woman over Camilla as his wife. He had chosen the monarchy's stability over a pattern of obstruction that was already damaging trust inside the palace. The queen's anger cracked into fear. In a private conversation later documented by the king's secretary, she admitted that Catherine's popularity terrified her because it could erase everything she had fought to achieve. History might remember her only as a controversial bridge between two more admired women, the late princess who came before her and the future queen waiting after her. Charles did not comfort her. Instead, he placed a folder on the table containing cancelled engagements, altered guest lists, delayed approvals, and briefing papers withheld from Catherine's team. A royal briefing paper is an official document preparing family members for duties, decisions, or public events, and controlling those papers meant controlling who could act with confidence. The Westminster speech had not been one isolated mistake. It had been part of a campaign. Camilla removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the folder. She told him to look at what his decision had cost. Then she warned that if he stripped her office of influence, she would stop shielding him from divisions across the wider family. Charles closed the folder but did not touch the ring. Yet the most consequential power in the palace did not belong to anger, marriage, or popularity. It belonged to the person controlling what the king's decision would become. Royal declarations can disappear beneath ceremony, but signed authority leaves a permanent mark. While Charles and Camilla confronted the wreckage of their marriage, the king's private secretary carried a sealed directive through the palace corridors. Its language was precise. Catherine's official program, charitable priorities, and future constitutional preparation would now answer directly to the sovereign and the Prince of Wales. Camilla's household would no longer possess the power to delay, revise, or obstruct them. Influence inside the monarchy had never depended on titles alone. It lived inside calendars, funding approvals, briefing papers, and direct access to the person wearing the crown. A sealed directive was a signed royal order sent to senior officials, turning the monarch's decision into instructions the household was required to follow. Charles had created a protected channel around Catherine's work, removing the queen consort's office from decisions affecting the future king and queen's long-term program. Before sunset, cancelled engagements had to be restored, delayed plans had to be released, and any new interference had to be reported directly to him. William read the document inside his father's study without speaking. Every line strengthened his wife, yet every line also pulled him deeper into the fracture between Charles and Camilla. The prince knew accepting this authority would protect Catherine from hidden obstruction, but it would also make him part of a decision that had shaken his father's marriage. The king watched his son carefully. He remembered how often William had suffered because older royals allowed private conflict to spill into public duty. Now the monarch was asking him to carry another division, this time in the name of stability. Guilt crossed Charles's face, but he did not withdraw the order. The future could not remain trapped by the fears of the present. William reached the final page and stopped. Beneath the formal wording, his father had added a sentence in his own hand: "The future must never again be silenced to preserve the comfort of the present." The words transformed the directive from an administrative decision into a personal judgment on everything that had happened. Charles lifted the fountain pen used to sign it and offered it to his son, as though inviting him to accept the responsibility now passing toward his household. William did not take it. He asked whether his father was truly prepared to live with what would follow. The king slowly set the pen down and answered, "I must be." Elsewhere, a copy reached Camilla's private secretary. The official read the first page twice, understood that her authority had already been reduced, and walked toward the Queen's rooms carrying news that could not be softened. By nightfall, the order had reached every office that mattered, and Camilla's world began changing one closed door at a time. The fallout did not arrive with raised voices or public disgrace. It came through altered calendars, unanswered calls, and officials who suddenly required the king's approval before following Camilla's instructions. By the following morning, the queen still possessed her title, her rooms, and her ceremonial place beside Charles. But the machinery that once responded instantly to her wishes had slowed to a humiliating stop. For the first time since becoming queen, Camilla felt the palace moving around her instead of with her. Catherine's postponed engagements returned to the calendar before breakfast. Her advisors received direct access to royal briefings, and joint projects once managed by the Queen Consort's office were transferred to William's household. Royal briefings are official papers and meetings that prepare family members for duties, decisions, and public appearances, so controlling access to them means controlling who acts with confidence and authority. Senior courtiers understood the message immediately. Charles had decided that Catherine's future position mattered more than Camilla's desire to manage who appeared beside the crown and when. The Queen entered her morning briefing expecting familiar faces, but 2 untouched glasses of water stood before empty chairs. She asked where her senior officials were. The remaining aide explained that both now reported through the prince's team under the new directive. Camilla removed her glasses, folded them with deliberate care, and said, "Then there is no meeting." She dismissed the aide and remained alone, facing the first undeniable proof that her title no longer guaranteed obedience. Catherine felt no victory. When her secretary confirmed that the cancelled engagements had been restored, she found William and admitted that she could not celebrate while another woman's marriage appeared to be collapsing because of her. The future king reminded her that she had not created the obstruction, but his reassurance did little to ease the weight. Her success had arrived beside someone else's suffering, and that contrast made the new authority feel less like triumph than burden. Camilla then withdrew from a joint royal reception where she and Catherine were expected to appear together. A royal reception is a formal gathering hosted by members of the family to honor guests, charities, or national service. Her refusal forced Charles into another choice: cancel the event and appear weakened, or proceed without his wife. The king did not hesitate. He confirmed the reception would continue with Catherine at his side, making clear that Camilla's absence would no longer control the crown's program. Yet Catherine refused to let the directive become the final word. She asked Charles for permission to meet the Queen alone, without officials, husbands, or prepared statements. The monarch studied her, then agreed. The palace expected Catherine to consolidate her victory, but instead, she walked toward the one conversation everyone else was too afraid to attempt. No aides accompanied Catherine when she entered Camilla's private sitting room. No secretary recorded the exchange, and no husband or heir stood between them. For the first time, the 2 women faced each other without titles, schedules, or palace machinery. Camilla expected triumph disguised as sympathy. Instead, Catherine said something she had not prepared to hear. "I never asked him to humiliate you, and I will not build my future on your destruction." The Queen did not answer. She kept Catherine standing for several long moments, unwilling to offer comfort or equality too quickly, before finally pointing toward a chair. Catherine sat, because refusing would turn honesty into another contest. She had demanded this meeting after realizing that palace decisions had reduced them to rival symbols, one defending the present and the other representing the future. That mattered, because neither woman could escape the meaning attached to her position. A future queen is the wife of the heir expected to serve beside him when he becomes king, while a queen consort holds dignity through marriage to the reigning sovereign, rather than through independent constitutional power. Catherine told Camilla that Charles had been right to protect the monarchy's next chapter, but wrong to let that protection become a public wound inside their family. The Queen's restraint broke. She accused the younger woman of possessing everything she had never been given freely: public affection, a secure marriage, and an unquestioned path toward the throne. Compassion, she said, sounded noble when spoken from the side that had already won. Catherine did not retreat. She admitted that the role frightened her because every increase in authority took something from her children, her privacy, and the ordinary family life she still fought to preserve with William. The future did not feel like victory to her. It felt like responsibility arriving before she was ready, with millions watching for one mistake. That confession changed the room, but it did not erase the conflict. Catherine offered a conditional peace. She would protect Camilla's charitable legacy and ceremonial dignity, ensuring that years of service were not erased, but only if the Queen ended every effort to restrict her program or use Charles's fear of replacement against him. Then Camilla opened a drawer and removed the folded Westminster speech. She smoothed its creased pages slowly, as though handling the evidence of everything that had gone wrong. The Queen pushed them across the table and said, "Then make certain they remember what you say." Catherine accepted the pages without triumph. She understood that this was not forgiveness, but it was surrender of a different kind. The first decision either woman had made that did not require the other to disappear. When Catherine carried those pages back into public view, the private shift inside the palace became a national reckoning no royal household could contain. The story escaped the palace before noon. By evening, the king's declaration dominated broadcasts, newspaper offices, and crowds gathered outside royal gates. Yet the image that defined the moment was not Charles confronting Camilla, or Catherine receiving new authority. It was Catherine, standing at a reception with the once cancelled speech in her hands, while the king watched from one side and Camilla stood silently on the other. Britain understood the message before a single word was spoken. Palace communications confirmed that Charles had complete confidence in the future queen, and had approved an expanded role for her in shaping the monarchy's long-term program. Palace communications meant the official statements issued on behalf of the royal household, carrying the sovereign's position to the public and the press. Broadcasters immediately described the decision as the clearest sign yet that the crown was moving toward William and his wife, while commentators questioned whether Camilla had suffered a permanent loss of influence. The king entered the reception composed but strained. He knew the cameras were no longer recording only royal duty. They were measuring the cost of his allegiance. Every glance toward Catherine confirmed his decision, while every moment beside the Queen exposed the wound it had created inside his marriage. Camilla had once refused to attend, yet she arrived. She understood that absence would make her look defeated, while disruption would turn private devastation into public chaos. The Queen stood through the ceremony with controlled sadness, listening, as the woman she had tried to restrain prepared to speak from the place she could no longer deny her. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered beneath a giant newspaper front page, carrying the headline, "I stand with her," above photographs of Catherine and a solemn Camilla. When the future queen's car passed, applause spread through the crowd. One woman raised a simple sign reading, "Strength without revenge," capturing the feeling that had begun to replace the hunger for a royal victor. Catherine unfolded the restored pages and delivered the address once removed from the Westminster program. Then she paused and added a line that did not appear in the prepared text. She said the monarchy survived not when one woman defeated another, but when duty was protected without stripping anyone of dignity. The words landed harder than accusation. Charles looked first toward her, then toward his wife, realizing that the meaning of his declaration would now be shaped by what both women did after the conflict. As the audience applauded, Catherine folded the speech and turned toward Camilla instead of the king. The Queen gave one restrained nod. She returned it, transforming a gesture of rivalry into a public acknowledgement of peace. The applause eventually faded, but inside the family one final decision remained: whether allegiance had divided the monarchy forever or forced it to become something stronger. King Charles's declaration did not produce a winner and a loser in the way the palace first feared. It exposed a truth the monarchy had resisted for generations. The future cannot be protected by silencing the person destined to carry it, and the past cannot be honored by allowing insecurity to control the present. Catherine emerged stronger. Camilla emerged wounded but not destroyed. Charles emerged changed, finally understanding that loyalty requires both courage and consequence. The new royal balance was settled without another public battle. Catherine's expanded authority remained in place. William's household gained a formal role in long-term planning, and separate royal offices were permanently forbidden from interfering with their program. Long-term planning meant the private preparation of duties, priorities, and responsibilities that would shape the next reign. The decision protected the future king and queen without removing the dignity of those serving in the present. Camilla kept her title, charitable work, ceremonial position, and place beside her husband, but she accepted that she could no longer control Catherine's visibility or preparation. Charles met her privately inside his sitting room and found her wedding ring still resting beside the closed folder. He acknowledged that his declaration had humiliated her. The king did not withdraw the decision, yet he apologized for allowing duty to become cruelty, and for forgetting that a correct judgment could still be delivered in a damaging way. The queen entered, picked up the ring, and placed it back on her finger. When the monarch reached for her hand, she allowed him to take it. The folder remained closed between them, confirming that the old struggle would not be reopened. Catherine later told William that his father's support had not made her feel victorious. It had made her accountable for every choice that followed. The prince answered that this was precisely why Charles had trusted her with greater power. She understood authority as a burden rather than a prize. Camilla then instructed her office through a documented order to cooperate fully with Catherine's team. She personally returned the remaining papers connected to the cancelled Westminster address, ending the obstruction that had triggered the crisis. The truth was finally clear. Charles had not stood with Catherine because he had stopped loving his wife. He had stood with her because constitutional judgment, the duty to protect the monarchy above private preference, required him to separate devotion from responsibility. The crown survived because Catherine refused revenge. Camilla surrendered control without surrendering dignity. William defended reconciliation, and the king accepted responsibility for both his decision and its cost. "I stand with her" began as a declaration of allegiance, but it became something larger. The moment Charles protected Catherine's future, Camilla accepted the limits of her power, and the crown finally learned that strength does not require one woman to be destroyed, so another can rise. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.